For 23 years, James believed his wife loved him more than she feared her mother. That was the lie that cost him everything. When James met Rebecca in college, she was beautiful, intelligent, and independent, the kind of woman who made him believe in forever. He didn't know that her mother, Patricia, had spent decades building a cage so invisible, so perfectly constructed, that nobody could see the bars until it was far too late. James thought he was marrying Rebecca. What he didn't realize was that he was also marrying Patricia. That he was stepping into a relationship where every decision would be questioned, every action scrutinized, every moment of happiness monitored by a woman who loved her daughter so much that she couldn't bear to let her go. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared James for the moment when his own children stopped looking at him with love and started looking at him with suspicion. Because the real betrayal wasn't what Patricia did to him in those early years. The real betrayal came later, when the poison had already spread so deep into his family that pulling it out would feel like tearing his life apart. And when that moment finally arrived, when James realized just how thoroughly his family had been turned against him, he had to make an impossible choice: fight to save his marriage and his relationship with his children, or walk away from everything he'd built. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. James was 26 when he met Rebecca at the University of Texas. He was studying business. She was in her final year of psychology, and when their eyes met across a crowded lecture hall on the first day of an elective class, something shifted in his chest. Rebecca was the kind of beautiful that came from genuine kindness, not just in her face, but in the way she listened to people, the way she made others feel like they mattered. Their first conversation lasted 3 hours. They were supposed to discuss a chapter on behavioral psychology. Instead, they talked about their dreams, their fears, the homes they wanted to build someday. By the time they left the library that night, James knew he was going to marry her. It took 3 weeks for him to actually ask her out. 3 weeks of carefully constructed plans and conversations meant to seem casual. Rebecca said yes immediately. She told him later that she'd known from that first day in the lecture hall too. Their relationship moved quickly. Within 6 months, they were talking about moving in together. Within a year, James had bought a ring, a modest diamond on a white gold band that he'd saved for since he was 19 years old. He was ready to spend his life with this woman. What he wasn't prepared for was what happened when he asked her father for permission. Rebecca's father gave his blessing immediately. He hugged James, told him he was gaining a son, and said he was grateful his daughter had found someone who loved her the way he loved her mother. But her father also said something else, something that James didn't fully understand at the time. He took James aside and said, "Her mother is going to make this difficult. Just remember that Patricia loves Rebecca so much that she sometimes forgets Rebecca is her own person. Be patient with her, but don't let her control your life." At the time, James thought it was just a father's worried speech. Every parent worries when their child gets engaged, he assumed. Patricia would come around. She would see that James was good for her daughter and would accept him into the family. He didn't understand yet that Patricia hadn't just spent years raising Rebecca. She'd spent years making Rebecca need her. And a woman who believes her purpose is to be needed doesn't let go easily. When Rebecca told her mother about the engagement, Patricia's reaction was shocking. She didn't cry tears of joy. She cried tears of something else. Something that looked like fear, or loss, or abandonment. She held Rebecca and told her she was making a mistake. She said that James seemed nice enough, but nice wasn't enough. She said that men always eventually disappoint you, that they leave or they cheat or they change, and that Rebecca shouldn't throw away her independence for someone who would inevitably hurt her. Rebecca, confused and torn between excitement about her engagement and guilt about her mother's sadness, tried to comfort her mother. But Patricia had already made her decision. She wasn't going to celebrate this wedding. She was going to monitor it. The wedding planning was supposed to be exciting. Instead, it became a minefield. Patricia called Rebecca constantly, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day. She had opinions about every decision. The venue was wrong. The date was inconvenient. The colors Rebecca had chosen made her look washed out. The guest list was too big, or the reception hall too small, or the menu too expensive. And subtly, so subtly that Rebecca didn't notice, Patricia began asking questions about James. Does he spend too much time at work? Has he ever looked at another woman? Doesn't it bother you that he has friends who are girls? Have you thought about what will happen if his business fails? These weren't accusations. They were just questions, delivered with Patricia's signature tone of concerned care. She was only looking out for Rebecca's best interests. She was only trying to protect her from potential heartbreak. Rebecca, who loved her mother and had been trained her entire life to value her mother's opinions above her own instincts, began to worry. The night before her wedding, she almost called it off. She went to her mother's hotel room in tears and said she was terrified, unsure, afraid that she was making a terrible mistake. Patricia held her and said that whatever Rebecca decided, she would support her. Then, in the gentlest possible way, she told Rebecca that she didn't have to go through with this if she didn't want to. There was no shame in admitting you'd made a mistake. Rebecca could always come home. But Rebecca didn't call off the wedding. She married James in a white dress that her mother insisted she'd chosen, though Patricia had actually picked it out and convinced Rebecca that it was what she really wanted. The reception was beautiful. James's family celebrated the couple's union. Rebecca's family smiled for the cameras, and Patricia watched from the sidelines, her expression unreadable. That night, as James and Rebecca left for their honeymoon, a week in Cancun that Patricia had told Rebecca was a waste of money, she was already planning how to maintain her hold on her daughter. She couldn't stop Rebecca from loving James, but she could make sure that Rebecca never felt completely secure in that love. She could create enough doubt, enough fear, enough worry that Rebecca would always need to check in with her mother. She could make sure that even when James and Rebecca were alone, Patricia's voice was there in Rebecca's head. And that's exactly what Patricia did. During James and Rebecca's honeymoon, Patricia called 3 times. Each call came with some crisis that required Rebecca's attention. A leak in the house, a family emergency with a distant aunt, drama with one of Rebecca's childhood friends who needed advice. By the end of their honeymoon, Rebecca had spent more time worrying about her mother's problems than enjoying her time with her new husband. James didn't complain. He thought it was just an adjustment period. He thought that once Patricia realized that the family was handling things fine without Rebecca, she would relax and accept their marriage. He was wrong. The first year of James and Rebecca's marriage was deceptive. On the surface, everything looked perfect. They bought a small house in the suburbs. Rebecca got a job as a school counselor. James's business was growing. But underneath that surface, something was rotting. Patricia had begun a systematic campaign to undermine James's place in his wife's life. It was never obvious. Patricia never said anything that would make Rebecca angry enough to cut off contact. Instead, she deployed 1,000 tiny weapons. Whenever James made a decision about the house or their finances, Patricia would call Rebecca and say, "Honey, are you sure James knows what he's doing? That seems risky." When James went out with friends, Patricia would text Rebecca asking what he was doing, who he was with, and whether there were women there. When Rebecca and James had small disagreements, the normal friction that every married couple experiences, Patricia would call immediately, as if she had a sixth sense, and ask Rebecca what James had done to upset her. She never once suggested that Rebecca might be wrong or that perhaps James had a valid point. She only listened sympathetically, agreed that James was being unfair, and reinforced the idea that Rebecca deserved better. After a few months of this, Rebecca started feeling anxious around her husband. She couldn't pinpoint why. James hadn't changed. He was still loving, still attentive, still the same man she'd married. But now his presence made her nervous. She began to second-guess his motives, his honesty, his love. Was he really working late at the office? Or was he with someone else? Why did he need to go to the gym? Wasn't he happy with his body? Why did he want to spend time with his friends? Wasn't she enough for him? These thoughts didn't come from her own insecurity. They had been planted there, carefully, by her mother. 2 years into the marriage, when Rebecca announced that she was pregnant, Patricia's behavior shifted again. This was her moment to become the most important person in her daughter's life once more. She moved into James and Rebecca's guest room during the pregnancy, telling James that Rebecca would need support, that having her mother there was essential. James was uncomfortable with it, but didn't want to be controlling, didn't want to be the kind of husband who would deny his pregnant wife her mother's help. So he agreed. But Patricia's presence in the house was oppressive. She criticized James's cooking. She questioned his choice to work while Rebecca was pregnant. She told Rebecca that James didn't understand what she was going through, that only another woman could really provide the kind of support she needed. She established routines with Rebecca that excluded James. Late-night talks, Shopping trips. Doctor's appointments where Patricia came instead of James. When their daughter Emma was born, Patricia was in the delivery room. James had to wait in the hallway. Patricia held the baby before James did. Patricia announced Emma's birth to the family before James had a chance to tell his own parents. And from that moment forward, Patricia began the work of making sure that Emma would know her grandmother as her true protector, her real mother figure, and her father as someone peripheral, someone to be tolerated, someone to be managed. 3 years later, when their son Thomas was born, James realized that something had fundamentally broken in his marriage. He loved Rebecca. He was certain of that. But their relationship had become transactional and cold. She had sex with him because they were married, not because she wanted him. She made decisions about the children without consulting him, always deferring instead to Patricia's advice. She spent more time on the phone with her mother than she spent talking to her husband. And most painfully, his children didn't know him. Emma, who was 3, didn't run to him when he came home from work. Thomas, who was an infant, cried when James tried to hold him. Patricia had systematically convinced Rebecca that James wasn't safe with the children. Not physically, she was too smart for that, but emotionally. Patricia would tell Rebecca stories about how exhausted she looked when James took the children, about how Emma seemed anxious after spending time alone with her father, about how Thomas might have picked up something from the house that she couldn't put her finger on, but that worried her. These stories had no basis in reality. They were complete fabrications. But they worked. Rebecca became suspicious of James. She started asking questions about what he did with the children when they were alone. She installed a nanny camera in the nursery. She called him multiple times a day when he was out with Emma, asking where they were and what they were doing. James felt like he was being monitored, investigated, treated like a criminal in his own home. He tried to talk to Rebecca about it, but whenever he brought it up, she would say that her mother was just worried, that Patricia was only trying to help, and that if James really loved their family, he would understand why they needed extra caution. The worse it got, the more James tried. He bought Rebecca flowers. He planned romantic dinners. He suggested family therapy. He read parenting books that Patricia recommended, changed his approach to discipline, started coaching Emma's soccer team so he could spend more time with her. Nothing worked. Because Patricia's goal wasn't to help James become a better husband and father. Her goal was to make sure he understood his place in the hierarchy. And his place was below Patricia. When James was 35 and Emma was 7 and Thomas was 4, something shifted. Emma came home from school and told James that she didn't want him to help with her homework anymore. When he asked why, she said that grandmother had told her that Daddy didn't know how to teach properly, that he might confuse her. Thomas, who had been clingy as a baby, now avoided his father entirely. When James tried to read him a bedtime story, Thomas would ask for his mother or grandmother instead. On Emma's 8th birthday, James gave her a camera, something she'd been begging for. He spent the afternoon teaching her how to use it, excited to share something with his daughter. Patricia, who witnessed this, later told Rebecca that she was concerned that James was trying too hard with the children, that it seemed excessive, that she worried he might be trying to buy their love because he knew, deep down, that they didn't naturally gravitate toward him. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. By suggesting something that wasn't true, Patricia had made Rebecca question James's motives. And once Rebecca began questioning him, once she started seeing his parenting through the lens of suspicion that her mother had provided, she began to enforce distance between James and his children. By the time James and Rebecca had been married for 15 years, the damage was catastrophic. James had become a ghost in his own home. He came home from work to a house that felt cold. He ate dinner while Rebecca checked her phone for messages from Patricia. He slept in a bed with a woman who loved him but didn't trust him, who cared for him but resented him, who had been so thoroughly convinced by her mother that James was the problem that she couldn't imagine any other narrative. Emma, who was 15, wouldn't speak to her father beyond the necessities. When he tried to ask about her day, she gave one-word answers and hurried away. Thomas, who was 12, treated him with the kind of polite distance he might show a stranger. James had missed Little League games because Patricia had convinced Rebecca that he would only be there to criticize Thomas's performance. He had been excluded from a school play because Patricia suggested that his presence might make Emma nervous. He had been kept out of family decisions about vacation destinations and holiday plans. Patricia had somehow become the central figure in a family that wasn't even hers to control. and no one seemed to notice that it was happening. Rebecca's friends thought Patricia was a caring mother. The grandchildren's teachers thought Patricia was an involved grandmother. Patricia's own friends thought she was a selfless woman who loved her daughter and grandchildren deeply. No one saw the manipulation. No one understood that every kind gesture was calculated to reinforce Patricia's position as the most important person. No one realized that every piece of advice was designed to destabilize James's marriage and his relationship with his children. James finally reached his breaking point on a Thursday night in October. Emma was a sophomore in high school. Thomas was in middle school. Rebecca was in the living room, on the phone with Patricia, as she had been almost every evening. James came home to an empty kitchen, no dinner prepared, not even a greeting. He found his children in their rooms doing homework. He went to find Rebecca and stopped in the doorway when he heard what she was saying to her mother. She was crying, and she was telling Patricia that she didn't know if she could stay married to James anymore, that she was so unhappy, that she didn't think he loved her or the children, that she thought maybe they should separate so that she and the children could be peaceful again, could focus on their own lives without the stress of managing James's emotions and his neediness and his expectations. James stood in the hallway, listening to his wife describe him as if he were a burden, a problem to be managed or eliminated. And he realized something that should have been obvious years ago. This wasn't going to change. Patricia had won. She had successfully convinced Rebecca that the problem with their marriage wasn't Patricia's interference. The problem was James himself. And as long as James stayed, as long as he remained in their lives, Rebecca would never be happy because her mother had made sure that Rebecca would never see him as anything other than a threat. The next day, James did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He called a therapist, not for couples counseling. He'd tried that 3 years earlier, and Patricia had convinced Rebecca that the therapist was biased against her. He called a therapist for himself. He needed to understand why he had stayed so long in a situation that was clearly damaging to him. He needed to understand how his own wife could believe such terrible things about him. And most importantly, he needed to understand his children. Because beneath all the anger and the hurt and the sense of betrayal, James still loved his children more than he loved his own life. But he had come to realize that his presence in their lives was actually causing them harm. Every time he tried to connect with them, Patricia had poisoned that connection, had made them see his love as something suspicious or controlling. His therapist, Dr. Marshall, was a woman in her 60s who had years of experience dealing with family manipulation and emotional abuse. When James told her his story, she listened without interrupting. She took notes. And when he finished, she said something that changed everything. "James, I want you to understand something. What you've described is a form of psychological abuse. Not from your children. They're victims too. But Patricia has weaponized your marriage and your relationship with your children against you. And Rebecca, whether she realizes it or not, has become complicit. She's allowed her mother to dictate the narrative of your marriage." James broke down. He had never thought of it that way. He had spent so long trying to fix things, trying to be better, trying to understand what he'd done wrong, that he hadn't recognized that he wasn't the problem. The problem was that he'd been blamed for things that weren't his fault. Dr. Marshall suggested something radical. She suggested that James tell Rebecca the truth. Not in anger, not in accusation, but in the clearest, most direct way possible. She suggested that he lay out everything. The manipulation, the lies, the way Patricia had systematically turned the children against him, the way Rebecca had been used as a tool in Patricia's campaign. She suggested that he do this not to hurt Rebecca or to make her feel guilty, but because Rebecca deserved to know the truth. Because their children deserved to know the truth. And because the only way anything could change was if someone finally said it out loud. That night, James asked Rebecca to sit down with him in the living room. For the first time in years, he turned off the television, put his phone away, and gave his wife his complete attention. He started by telling her that he loved her. He said that he knew she didn't believe that she'd been told so many stories about him that had made her doubt his love, but that it was true. Then he told her everything. He told her about the conversations he'd overheard between her and Patricia. He told her about the way Patricia had coached the children to avoid him. He told her about the therapy appointments that Patricia had suggested, the books about warning signs in relationships that Patricia had given her, the late-night calls where Patricia would ask if Rebecca was sure about her marriage. Rebecca didn't interrupt. She sat in silence while her husband laid out 15 years of accumulated pain. And when he finished, she started to cry. Not angry tears. Not dismissive tears. Real tears. She said, "I don't know what you're talking about." But her voice had changed. Doubt had crept in. The certainty with which she had believed her mother's narrative began to fracture. That's when James took the final step. He suggested, calmly and without anger, that they go to therapy together. And this time, he said, they should go to someone that neither of them knew beforehand. Someone without any stake in their marriage except a professional commitment to help them understand what had happened. Rebecca resisted. She said she didn't want to spend money on therapy. But James was quiet and firm. He said that he loved her and that he believed their marriage could be saved, but only if she was willing to see what was really happening. Only if she was willing to consider the possibility that her mother might not have told her the complete truth. Their therapist was a woman named Dr. Sandra Wheeler, and she was remarkable. In the first session, she asked each of them to describe the other person. James described a woman he loved deeply but who had become a stranger. He described a kind person who had been manipulated by someone who claimed to care about her. He described the pain of watching his children grow up with fear in their eyes when they looked at him. Rebecca described a man who was controlling, who didn't understand her need to be close to her mother, who had isolated her from her family through subtle criticisms and boundaries. She described anxiety and unhappiness and a sense of being trapped between her husband and her mother. Dr. Wheeler asked one question. "Rebecca, who told you that your husband was controlling?" Rebecca opened her mouth to answer, then paused. She thought about all the times her mother had said those exact words. She thought about the moments when James was simply making a decision as the head of the household, and her mother had reframed it as control. She thought about how every criticism of her mother had been met with her mother's gentle assertion that James was the real problem. "My mother," Rebecca finally said. The moment she said it, she seemed to understand something that she hadn't let herself understand before. Over the following weeks, Dr. Wheeler systematically walked Rebecca through her marriage. She had Rebecca describe specific incidents where she had believed James was being controlling. Then she asked Rebecca where those accusations came from. Almost always, they came from something her mother had said. Dr. Wheeler then asked Rebecca to consider what the actual situation had been. When James suggested they spend less time with Patricia and more time building their own family traditions, was that control? Or was that a reasonable request from a husband? When James was concerned about Patricia's constant presence in their marriage and wanted to establish some boundaries, was he trying to isolate Rebecca? Or was he trying to protect their marriage? When James asked to spend one-on-one time with his children, was that suspicious and concerning? Or was that a normal part of being a father? One by one, Rebecca began to see her marriage through a different lens. In one particularly painful session, Dr. Wheeler asked Rebecca, "Has it occurred to you that your mother might be jealous of your marriage to James?" Rebecca looked shocked by the question, but the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. Patricia had spent her entire life being the most important person in her daughter's world. And then James had come along and taken that position. Of course Patricia was jealous. Of course she would work to undermine the marriage. Rebecca realized that her mother hadn't been trying to protect her from a bad husband. Her mother had been trying to protect her place as the central figure in Rebecca's life. The second breakthrough came during a session where Dr. Wheeler asked Rebecca to bring the children. Emma, who was now 16, and Thomas, who was 13. Dr. Wheeler told them that she wanted to understand their relationship with their father. Emma was defensive at first. She talked about how controlling James was, how critical he could be, how she didn't feel comfortable around him. Dr. Wheeler asked her for specific examples. Emma struggled to come up with anything concrete. Then Dr. Wheeler asked her if anyone had ever told her that her father was controlling. Emma nodded slowly. She said, "Grandma told me." Thomas, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. He said that grandmother had told him that his father didn't really want to spend time with him, that he only pretended to care because mother made him. When Dr. Wheeler asked him who was taking care of him now, who was the person he spent the most time with when he was sad or scared, he said his grandmother. She asked him if he had ever told his father when he was sad or scared. He said no. He said that grandmother told him not to bother his father because his father was already burdened by the family. Dr. Wheeler looked at Rebecca and said, "Your mother has systematically convinced your children that their father doesn't love them. and she has positioned herself as the person who does. This is called parental alienation, and it's a form of psychological abuse that causes significant damage to children. Your daughter is 16 years old and doesn't feel safe with her own father. Your son believes his father doesn't want him in his life. Both of these children are suffering, and they're suffering because of the narrative that Patricia has created. Rebecca covered her face with her hands. She cried in a way that James had never seen her cry. She cried because she understood, finally, what she had allowed to happen. She cried because she had been so focused on protecting her relationship with her mother that she had failed to protect her children from their grandmother's manipulation. She cried because she realized that her own insecurity had made her vulnerable to her mother's poison. And she cried because she knew that fixing this was going to require her to do something that terrified her: stand up to her mother. 3 weeks later, Rebecca called her mother and asked her to come to the house. Patricia, not suspecting anything, arrived on a Saturday afternoon expecting to have her usual welcome. But instead, she found Rebecca, James, Emma, and Thomas all sitting in the living room together. Patricia immediately looked uncomfortable. She asked James why he was there. Rebecca said that he lived there, that he was her husband, that he was their father, and that they needed to talk as a family about some things that Patricia had done. Patricia's face went very still. She looked like a person caught in something terrible. She said, "I don't know what you're talking about." Rebecca pulled out a notebook where she had written down the incidents that Dr. Wheeler had helped her identify. She read them aloud. The texts where Patricia had suggested that James was cheating on her. The phone calls where Patricia had told Rebecca not to trust James's parenting. The way Patricia had told Emma that her father was too critical. The way Patricia had told Thomas that his father didn't want to spend time with him. Patricia listened in silence. And when Rebecca finished, Patricia said something that almost broke Rebecca's heart. "I was only trying to protect you." She said it with such genuine sadness that for a moment, Rebecca faltered. But then Emma, who was 16 and angry in the way that teenagers can be angry when they finally understand that they've been lied to, stood up and said, "Grandma, you lied to us. About Daddy. You made us think he didn't love us. And he does. He always did. You just wanted us to love you more." Patricia tried to defend herself. She said that she had only spoken the truth. She said that she had always sensed that James didn't truly appreciate Rebecca, and she was right to be concerned. She said that she was a good mother, a good grandmother, and that Rebecca was being ungrateful and cruel. She said that if Rebecca chose James over her, then she would never forgive her. It was emotional blackmail, pure and simple. Rebecca looked at her mother and made a decision that she would spend years coming to terms with. She said, "Mother, I love you. But you have hurt my family. You have hurt my children. You have hurt my husband. And I can't let you do that anymore. You are not welcome in this house until you're willing to take responsibility for what you've done and apologize to all of us, especially to James and to the children." Patricia stood up and said, "Then I guess I'll never be welcome in this house again." She walked toward the door. Rebecca didn't stop her. James watched his wife's face, and he saw the moment when she made peace with the reality of losing her mother rather than losing her family. Patricia left. She didn't say goodbye to the children. She didn't hug Rebecca. She just left. The weeks after Patricia left were strange and painful in ways that none of them had anticipated. Rebecca grieved, not for the version of her mother that actually existed, but for the version she had always wanted to have. A mother who could admit when she was wrong. A mother who could choose her daughter's happiness over her own need for control. A mother who could love her grandchildren more than she needed to be the center of their lives. James wanted to rush into the healing process. He wanted everything to go back to normal. But Dr. Wheeler helped him understand that there was no normal to go back to. They had to build something new. Emma needed therapy to process the fact that her grandmother had lied to her. Thomas needed help understanding that it wasn't his fault that he had believed the lies. Rebecca needed to learn how to set boundaries with her mother and how to recognize manipulation when it happened. And James needed to learn how to rebuild his relationships with his children without expecting that they would immediately forget years of accumulated doubt. 3 months later, Patricia called. She didn't ask to speak to Rebecca. She asked to speak to James. When he got on the phone, she said something that she had never said before in the entire history of their conflict. "I'm sorry." She said that she had been in therapy herself, that she had been forced to confront some things about her own childhood, about the way her parents had abandoned her, about the way she had used her relationship with Rebecca as a way to fill that void. She said that she understood now that she had hurt everyone she claimed to love. She said that she didn't expect forgiveness, but she wanted to try to repair the damage if anyone would let her. It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't undo the years of pain, but it was a beginning. Rebecca agreed to let her mother see the children, but only with specific conditions. Patricia had to respect the family's boundaries. She couldn't make negative comments about James. She couldn't tell the children that James had been wrong or controlling. She had to acknowledge when she had made mistakes. And if she violated these conditions, contact would be cut off immediately. Patricia agreed. The rebuilding took time. It took years, actually. Emma gradually began to see her father as the person he actually was rather than the monster her grandmother had convinced her he was. Thomas, who was only 13 when the truth came out, had an easier time letting go of his grandmother's narrative. He began to spend time with his father again, to talk to him about his day and his worries and his dreams. James was careful not to push too hard, not to expect that they would suddenly return to some perfect father-child relationship. He simply showed up. He was present. He was consistent. And slowly, his children remembered that their father had always loved them, even when they didn't believe it. Rebecca and James's marriage also healed, though not without continued therapy and deliberate work. Rebecca had to learn to trust her own judgment again. She had to learn to see James through her own eyes rather than through her mother's filter. And James had to learn to forgive his wife for the years when she had believed the worst about him. He had to understand that Rebecca had been a victim too, that she had been manipulated just as thoroughly as his children had been, and that her love for her mother had made her vulnerable in ways she couldn't control. 5 years after the confrontation, when Patricia had proven through her actions that she was genuinely trying to change, Rebecca asked her mother a question that she had never directly asked before. Why? Why did you do all of this? Why did you try so hard to ruin my marriage? Patricia was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that Rebecca hadn't expected. She said that she had been terrified. She said that when Rebecca married James, she understood on some level that her daughter no longer needed her in the way she had needed her before. She said that she had felt herself becoming less important, and that fear had transformed into something ugly. She said that she had convinced herself that she was protecting Rebecca, but that the truth was she was protecting herself. She was protecting her identity as a necessary, essential person in her daughter's life. She said that she had been so focused on keeping Rebecca close that she hadn't realized she was pushing her daughter away. She said that the worst part was realizing that all those years, she could have simply let her daughter live her life, could have built a real relationship with her son-in-law, could have been a grandmother that Emma and Thomas actually wanted to spend time with. Instead, she had made herself into a person that nobody wanted around. What Patricia didn't say, but what Rebecca understood anyway, was that Patricia had likely been treated the same way by her own mother, that she had learned this pattern of control and manipulation from somewhere, that she was repeating a cycle that had been established long before Rebecca was even born. And while understanding this didn't excuse what Patricia had done, it did provide context. It helped Rebecca understand that her mother wasn't evil. Her mother was broken. And sometimes, the kindest thing we can do is have compassion for broken people while still protecting ourselves and our families from their brokenness. Today, 5 years after the confrontation, Patricia sees her grandchildren regularly. But the dynamic has changed. She is no longer the central figure. She is a grandmother, not a replacement mother. She respects James's role as Emma and Thomas's father. She has built a real relationship with all of them that isn't based on manipulation or fear, but on honesty and boundaries. It's not perfect. There are still moments when old patterns try to emerge, when Patricia makes a comment or does something that reminds everyone of her old ways. But now, they have the tools to address it. They can say, "Patricia, that's not acceptable," and she can hear it. She can adjust. She can choose differently. The story of James and Rebecca isn't unique. It's replayed in households across America every single day. There are thousands of Patricias out there, parents who love their children so much that they can't let them go. Parents who believe that their worth is determined by how much their children need them. Parents who would rather destroy a marriage than admit that their child has grown up and has a right to a life separate from them. And there are thousands of Jameses, husbands and fathers who find themselves slowly erased from their own families, blamed for problems they didn't create, viewed with suspicion by people they love. There are thousands of Rebeccas, women caught between their husbands and their mothers, forced to choose, desperately wanting to make everyone happy, and in the process making no one happy. And there are thousands of Emmas and Thomases, children who grow up confused about who to trust, who are used as pawns in a game they didn't agree to play, who carry the scars of that manipulation into their own adult relationships. The question that haunts everyone who hears this story is simple. How did it get so far? How did Patricia manipulate an entire family for so many years without anyone acknowledging what was happening? The answer is that manipulation is subtle. It's invisible. It hides behind the language of love and care. It disguises itself as concern. It operates in the small moments, the carefully worded question, the innocent-sounding observation, the gentle suggestion that something might be wrong. By the time you realize what's happening, you're already deep inside the cage. You can't remember exactly when the bars appeared, and you've started to believe that maybe the cage is actually a safe place. This is why this story matters. This is why it's important to recognize the warning signs, to trust your own judgment, to be willing to see the people you love most as they actually are rather than as you wish them to be. Because the families that survive manipulation are the ones that are willing to have difficult conversations. They're the ones that are willing to call out uncomfortable truths. They're the ones that choose love in its most authentic form over love in its most comfortable form. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in James's story, or Rebecca's, or Emma's, or Thomas's, please know this. It's not too late to change the narrative. It's not too late to have the conversation that terrifies you. It's not too late to protect your family by setting boundaries with the people who are causing harm, even if those people claim to love you. It takes courage. It takes support. It takes professional help. But it is possible. Before you leave this video, ask yourself one question. Are there relationships in your own life that feel toxic? Are there people who claim to love you, but who make you doubt yourself? Are there dynamics that seem unhealthy, but that you've gotten so used to that you don't even see them anymore? Pay attention to those relationships. Pay attention to the way certain people make you feel. Because manipulation thrives in silence and in self-doubt. It thrives when we convince ourselves that we're overreacting or that we're being unfair. It thrives when we choose peace over honesty. Don't let that happen in your family. Don't let someone else's broken patterns become the blueprint for your own life. Let us know in the comments. Have you experienced something like this? Have you been in a relationship where someone tried to control you through subtlety and manipulation? What did you do to break free? We'd love to hear your stories. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because we have more stories coming. Stories about family betrayal, hidden secrets, and the difficult journey toward healing. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being willing to look at the hard truths in this story.